Well, Steve, the early voting was the biggest fraud operation yet in South Korean history. And so the fix is in. And, the Koreans are drawing a lot of inspiration from the US. And even the things that are being said are straight from the US, that the vote has to be too big to rig, that the steal has to be stopped. Stop the steal is ringing out here. You have heroic people who are willing to do whatever they can do. You think it's one of these moments in the history of Korea where you think of the revolutionary period in America, right, where people are pledging their lives, their fortune, their sacred honor, right? This is happening here in Korea. And so they are doing whatever they can to stop the steal, to make it too big to rig. Whether it will be enough to overcome the largest election fraud operation ever in Korea, that is the question for today. And there has been tireless efforts by people here, and it's going to be really dramatic to see what happens over the course of the main election voting day, which is usually much cleaner. But the early voting is where typically the massive fraud operation happens. But they also try to get the physical votes to catch up to the electronic manipulation. And whether or not these things can be stopped sufficiently. When President Yoon was elected, there was just enough prevention of fraud to keep him in there. And curiously enough, they didn't want an investigation into that previous election because it was by a margin of 0.7%, the closest in Korean history. And so they're trying to make a bigger fraud operation this time to overcome something like what happened in the previous election. And so the stakes, as you well know, Steve, could not be higher. And there are more and more people in Korea who have been awakening to that. We would love for something similar to happen through your audience. But it's really the influence that you've had in this process, and having us here in War Room has been massive here in Korea. And I think there is also a greater awakening of what's going on in America as a result of what you're doing.